everybody. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Get Ready. And I'm very pleased to have a second appearance by one of my favorite guests, the wonderful Dr. Peta Stapleton. We had talked earlier about the Tapping in the Classroom program. But today, we're going to be talking about Peta's fantastic new book. And I have a signed copy. There it is. Feel honored and privileged. And it's awesome. I had read an earlier version of it and all kinds of great stuff. And so welcome back to the show, Peta Stapleton.
Oh, thank you, Brad. Like even just for the second invitation to come back. It's fantastic.
You are the first guest to appear twice. So there you go.
There you are. There's a first.
So how, I mean, I know that you've been doing research in EFT for some time and are one of the top researchers and have done some fantastic studies, which I'm sure we will hear about in a little bit, but what prompted the book?
Yes. It was a chance encounter with a colleague who was at a conference, same conference as myself, and we were just having a coffee at a quiet point in the conference, and he said to me, "You should write a book." I said, "What am I going to write a book on?" Because I have written a couple of books over the years, different kind of unconscious behavior techniques, that kind of thing. And he went, no, you know, all this science stuff behind tapping. And my instantaneous kind of response was, "Oh my God, that'll be so boring. Nobody will ever read that book." Because I guess I was horrified to think, what we write this in academic articles, who would put this in a book? Anyway, he was persistent and started the ball rolling, I guess, and ultimately was the introduction to Hay House. But yeah, so my comment was, I don't have time to write a book, but apparently I did have time.
It was a limiting belief.
So many limiting beliefs. And I have said this once before in another interview, that I actually counted my lucky stars. I had tapping while I wrote the book, and I was able to do tapping because I think trying to find the sweet spot for a book on science and being an academic, and I was told by the publishing company, obviously, this is not an academic book. This is so that people really understand and grasp it. And I used tapping to find that sweet spot because I did struggle for a few months, and I'm not telling anybody else that except you, Brad. And everybody listening.
And the thousands of listeners.
Yeah.
But shh, nobody tell anybody else. No, and that's what I really appreciate about the book is that it is written for the layperson, you know, and it's awesome because so often, you know, as you know, and all of us in the tapping world know, there are all those people who are inclined to be skeptical and say, yeah, well, where's the research? And even if they've never asked about the research on anything else, but they'll ask about tapping, you know, and I think it's for two reasons. One, it does look a little strange at first to people who are new to it, but also I find the people who are the most skeptical or the most resistant are the ones who are most afraid it's going to work. And it's like, no, I don't want change in my life, and you're going to come along and say that something this simple can change me. And so I, you know, as a practitioner, am very grateful for a resource now to say, look, if you want research, here's a great book, and you don't have to be have a PhD to be able to understand it.
Yeah.
So
thanks, Brad. That was ultimately the end goal we were trying to get to. So, and it's lovely to kind of see that feedback that is coming through from people that are reading it out in the field, whether they're just curious, they're a practitioner, whatever it is, that, yeah, they're sort of saying they love the case studies that we've woven in as well. But yeah, just to be able to understand and go, oh, I get what that means and what the impact of that study might be, that kind of thing. So thank you. That's what we were trying to get to.
No, it's great because it is ultimately very readable, and the case studies are awesome, taking folks through and being able to see, you know, for folks reading it to say, oh, I can identify with this. This is, and you have so many great studies that you elaborate on, as well as, you know, even the further things. It's like, okay, we don't have a huge body of research on this, but there is some, and so that people with so many different issues can find some hope in this book that,
Yeah.
so tapping isn't just for other people.
Yes, yeah, and I think you're right. You know what you said before, often the people that perhaps are skeptical that this actually might work often have never given it a go. So they've actually, for whatever reason, never actually done tapping. So hopefully it will kind of, in the privacy of their own home, they could have a read of this on their, hard copy or their Kindle or whatever, and kind of go, okay, maybe there is something to this, and maybe I'll actually give it a go.
Yeah. So there's enough readable and accessible enough for anyone, but also enough science in there for folks who are like, is there really research? Because you actually are a research scientist.
Yeah. And I even do a statistics lesson. And now I don't want to scare anyone off that wants to read the book, but explain, what does it mean? What does it mean if, a study goes, we got significant results? What does that actually mean? So I'm sure my editors kind of, when they were reading it, was sort of going, oh. But I just briefly give you a mathematics lesson so that you can put it in context, that it's not like, one or two people had a case study written on them and that's research. It's kind of like, here's what it means when the sample size is, X number of people and significant sizes and effect sizes and things like that. So, yeah.
Right. Because for the non-scientist reading P.02, it's like,
what does that mean?
What does that mean? Doesn't seem like anything. Why would you even bother with something 0.02?
Yes, that's right. It's all about the least likely amount of chance.
So that's awesome. So obviously you've done quite a bit of research and studies on your own. Why don't you tell us about the latest research that you've done?
Yes, the latest we literally are releasing in about a week's time. So the most, I guess, what's the right word I'm looking for here, Brad? So the most recent trial that we actually ran was we replicated, you might remember about 5 years ago, 2012, Dr. Dawson Church did a study and it was published on tapping for cortisol levels in the body.
Right.
Yep. So it showed back at the time that 1 hour of tapping resulted in, the greatest decrease of cortisol, that stress hormone, 24%, compared to just resting, reading a magazine, or just doing a little bit of psychoeducation. We actually replicated that trial in March at Bond University. And I'm not going to give you any free information here because we're going to release it in another week or so, Brad, so you'll have to stay tuned. But we replicated
no scoop here.
No scoop, except it's coming out. So kind of frame by frame, we literally copied exactly the same study. And replication studies are really important in research, even though you might kind of go, it's already been done, why would you do it again? But what it does is really show that it's the method itself that works, not the researcher running the trial. So it didn't have that kind of therapeutic relationship influence or anything like that. So we are about to release that at an international conference that's being held here in a week. So by the time perhaps we start sharing this, we might actually be able to sort of share those results. So that has been the most recent. And just prior to that, we did the first 2-year follow-up of any EFT trial in the world. So we've had lots of 1-year follow-up, but we've actually completed a 2-year follow-up of our tapping for food craving trial that was a big online trial. So we're actually worldwide able to access those people. And that I can actually let you know that everything that had changed in that trial over that 6-12 months, 2 years later stays changed, meaning the food cravings don't come back, the restraint restraint improved even more 2 years later. So a person's willpower, ability, that kind of thing. Their psychological symptoms, anxiety, depression, reduced in the trial, and 2 years later was still at those reduced levels. Not one variable returned to baseline, which is where they started 2 years earlier. So we actually do have that under publication at the moment. So that's pretty cool, because to me, what that says is, because people go, does it last? Yeah. So they might go, yeah, it'll work in the moment. And there is a little bit in the book that says, why don't you have to keep tapping? Like if you have your chocolate cake or you have your anxiety or your phobia, it makes sense that if the spider's there, you would tap, but why don't you have to tap next time you see a spider or a chocolate cake? And those studies, 2 years follow-up, show that the brain changes. We really do have a memory reconsolidation thing that happens. So I do get into in the book. That 2 year study is not in the book because, of course, it was written and got edited prior to that coming out. But we can certainly let people know that the research continues. I'm going to have volume 2 come out. You do realise.
Exactly. And I'm trying to find it in here. But there were, you have some of the brain scans from your fMRI study in there too.
Yes.
Which is way cool.
Very way cool. And if anyone wants to see the color versions of those, because obviously the book's black and white, they're on my website. So you can just go to, peterstapleton.com and you can actually see the color versions of those and just an explanation. But yeah, again, the first time we were able to get access to an fMRI machine, and we're about to do another one. So that's something. Again, you get the scoop, Brad. Nobody knows that, but we're about to do another one. And we've just had that all approved by ethics, and we'll kind of, move on in the next sort of 6 to 12 months. But it's quite cool to kind of go, here's the changes. And that was only a 4-week tapping trial. So they did 2 weeks of tapping. Again, they did it for food issues because that's kind of my gig. But we saw the brain go quiet. And 4 weeks later, when they were scanned, the brain does not light up at the sight of food that 4 weeks earlier triggered 2 different massive areas in the brain. So, yeah, they walked out and they were bored. 5 weeks later, they were like, having a yawn. And we're like, we can tell your brains are not even activating, which is really important to know that that's how your food craving goes away. That if people kind of go, well, why don't I have to keep tapping? Well, your brain doesn't fire anymore, and here's the scans to prove it. Yeah, so it's very cool. There is another, Dr. Amy Gasser, who is a colleague of all of ours in the States. She has an fMRI study coming out quite shortly, which has been on anxiety in teenagers. So she's just putting the final touches on those. So again, we're going to see another brain scan study that shows anxiety quietens down in the brain when you tap.
Oh, that's so amazing. It's between the fMRI studies and the cortisol studies, is so great because so many of the other research projects, the studies, it's self-reported. It's like, do you feel better? Well, yes, I feel better. And it's like, okay, how do you measure that? Okay, well, here, we measure it with the cortisol. We measure it with the brain activity. It's like, this is real science. This is not just, hey, people believing that I think I feel better. And so, yeah, okay, great. Now we have research. So it's just awesome to have that.
It makes us laugh as researchers because many of the other talk therapies that obviously are gold standard and evidence-based and got the tick of approval everywhere don't have any of these studies of the physiological nature done on them. We don't necessarily have fMRI studies or heart rate variability studies, cortisol studies of these other major talk therapies that we teach at university level, which makes me kind of chuckle on the side to kind of go, man, we have so much hard science that shows the body changes. And there was a paper that came out late last year. Again, I don't think we squeezed it into the book, which was that clinical physiological markers change. And so that paper summarized all of the health physiological changes that occur after tapping in just the one paper at the time. So it really does summarize that, heart rate changes, blood pressure changes, all those kind of things. And they stay changed 6-12 months later.
I have actually have on my my desktop. I can see the picture that I'd saved that you had posted with the arrows up and the arrows down. So one of the interesting ones is gene expression. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so we know, and if anyone's curious to read a little bit more, I encourage everyone to read Dr. Bruce Lipton's book, The Biology of Belief, because he really started the ball rolling in this space. But the whole idea that, yes, we have DNA, it's responsible for how short I am. People don't realize I'm so short till they meet me in person. That's my DNA, which I can't change. But Bruce really showed, and researchers since, that the genetic material around the DNA is really important. And for a long time, they called it junk DNA. They actually thought it really isn't responsible for much, but it was worth 50% of every cell in our body. And what we know is things influence that information, which then influence the DNA. So I could grow taller any day now if I get this right, or change the color of my eyes or something. And so what we know that if someone has post-traumatic stress disorder, or they have an anxiety disorder or phobia, or something else along those realms, that you can actually change the expression of the DNA within a cell. And if that expression is changed, then it's kind of like what we call down-regulating the gene expression, which then means people don't have the symptoms. And turns out things like the way you think, the way you feel, as well as environmental triggers change the expression of DNA. So we've had two major, there's actually a third paper that's just come out only a month ago, two major DNA studies. The first one was only 1 hour of tapping. 1 hour resulted in 72 genes changing their expression. And they were things to do with cancer suppression. So you can actually, because often people think these things are like it's in my genes. And there's actually, say, for example, breast cancer, only one type of breast cancer that is driven by the gene itself. The other types of breast cancers are actually in the genetic material around the DNA, which means if you change the expression of that, you may not end up with a breast cancer that everybody else in the family has actually suffered from. So immune system DNA expression was changed in that 1 hour.
Wow.
So 72 genes, like it's hard to get your head around to kind of go 1 hour of tapping not only reduces your stress hormone, but 72 genes will change how they express themselves. And then the other major one, which was really important, was Dawson Church, where they did 10 hours. So a 10-week treatment plan, which is quite standard for post-traumatic stress disorder in veterans. And obviously they all met PTSD. They did 10 hours of that tapping over, and they had 6 genes that were all associated with the PTSD response and diagnosis that changed their expression, and 6 months later had not reverted back to obviously expressing themselves in a way that it looks like post-traumatic stress disorder. So to kind of get your head around that sort of thing and say, wow, like it really is a wow moment, like to kind of go, 6 months later, and there's your follow-up, that those genes don't re-express themselves, which is what we see as PTSD symptoms, those sorts of things. It's quite mind-blowing. Like I'm a nerd and I'm an introvert, and I kind of sit and read these studies and just go, oh, I can't believe it. And there's since been another paper come out just a month ago on the back of that 10 hour, which again showed a type of protein in the DNA, that DNA study of the 10 hours, that again changed its expression, which has implications for other kind of health functions in the body. They're hard papers to read, which is why we try to explain them in kind of those little YouTube clips and those infographics like what you just mentioned, just to sort of show people that here's what it means, that kind of thing. So I don't know about you, Brad, but I get blown away.
No, it really is stunning, because I mean, those of us who've been doing it for a while have known, and as you summarize it at the end of the book, at its basic, it's a stress relief tool.
Yes.
And that explains why it's so beneficial in so many areas, because most, if not all, of the issues we face physically and or emotionally are either caused by or worsened by stress. So to have a simple technique for clearing out stress, we can see that. But then when we go beyond that and go, oh, but there's all kinds of other gifts with purchase. What's the I can't think of the term where scientists are looking at going in and messing with the DNA of babies, and it's what is it?
Like a genetic kind of.
There's a catchy term that they have for creating this the ideal child. It's like you don't need to. We can do this. We can change the expression of the genes and create the best version of ourselves, the healthiest version of ourselves, as we're doing this process.
Yeah, and we actually if people need proof, we have proof.
Yeah, the proof is there. So, again, for anyone watching this, as you see us getting excited and talk about this, now, I'm come from an acting background, but Peta is actually a research scientist, Dr. Peta Stapleton, university professor. So this is, not just a couple of people. Hey, I think this tapping thing is, some woo-woo folks. So I want, pardon me?
I'm not too old and crusty yet, as the
Yes, not the crusty old professor,
Yeah.
but you know, but a valid person, a valid scientist. That so this is real. You know, we've been talking for years about how it benefits us. Many people are, hey, sure, I'll try it. Oh, hey, I feel better, and recognize it from that. But it is really exciting to have this evidence that's like, yes, this is science. I mean, that is the name in the title, the science, not the wishful thinking behind tapping or the possibly otherwise induced good feelings that that go along with tapping.
So true.
And I mean, so this is really a remarkable thing that you've done, that you've given to us to help those people that might otherwise be resistant and need a little hand holding, or for anyone who, I mean, it's a great book for anyone who's interested in tapping to read along and find out, hey, there's more to this, and read those case studies.
Yeah, and I think I was in the same boat, even writing it, because obviously I was collating, and not every piece of research is in there. We just sort of, really broke it down into the major areas. But even I was surprised at studies that I thought I knew everything out there in the EFT tapping science paper world, but I didn't. And I was constantly kind of chatting, with Dawson Church or David Feinstein, who are other researchers in the field, going, did you know there was a study on this? Or did you know there was a study on this? And there's these pockets around the world that we discovered were also publishing. And some of them, like there's a breast cancer study that's been done on, they measured the effect of EFT on obviously adherence to chemotherapy, because a lot of people drop off using it, and certain types of medications because of the negative side effects. And a clinical trial that's been run on that, that's in the book. But yeah, just some really interesting outcomes like that, the traumatic brain injury in war vets, those kinds of things, as well as there is a chapter right at the back where we talk about the clinical studies that have been done on other tapping techniques, not just EFT. So obviously thought field therapy, where it started, there's a couple of clinical trials there. There's also a meta-analysis that shows it really does work and it's not due to chance. Tappus Fleming's tapping technique has had clinical trials run on it. So I've included lots of other tapping research that's been done there, which I think is important for people to realise, there's more than just what we do, our clinical EFT. There's other versions out there that have actually had research run on them, and the research still holds up with these other types of tapping versions.
Yeah, I was happy to see that Tapas was in there. I met Tapas years ago, and every so often I use that. In fact, I just used it the other day, last week or 2 weeks ago, when my daughter was here visiting, and she had a headache, and I said, "Come here." And I often use that on folks for headaches, when they don't feel like tapping on their head.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I got to chat with Tapas about that about a year ago before the book came out. So she was tickled as well, I think. And I'm like, the research has been done. It's been done on her approach. So it's great.
Excellent. Well, again, so I was going to ask you what surprised you in researching this, but now you've already answered that question. You beat me to it. So
well, probably just the wide scope that is out there, and like you said earlier, sometimes there's not heaps of papers or trials run in a single area, but there are one or two that at least are showing promise, and they're included. The chronic pain area is gathering steam. So we've had, a couple of trials that have been run, but it's something that my team and I are turning our attention to in the next couple of years. Is we know it works for chronic pain. There's a few studies that show it, but that field will grow in the next couple of years as well. So yeah, I was surprised along the way, and my folder of the research was enormous, and I still have it here. And it keeps, like, even since the book came out, there's been more research that's come out, and I think we're exponentially increasing, which I think we'll continue to see in the next sort of decade.
yeah, you could do an update on the book every month. Which is fantastic. It's, I love, there was a comment in the book at one point where it said, how much evidence do you need?
Yes. I say that all the time, and I often say it from stage where nobody can reply. So, and it is. Sometimes people, they want the research, but it's like, how much do you need before the tipping point might happen? Because, we're really up to 130 clinical trials here now, and 98% of the trials show positive outcomes. So that's a pretty big statistic.
It's, so in your clinical opinion, EFT works?
Well, I did a TEDx on it once. Yes, look, I teach at master's level, so the pinnacle of psychology, the mainstream therapies. And look, they work. I'm not saying that the mainstream therapies and the gold standard approaches don't work. But the one thing that I do talk about in the book, and it was in the TEDx late last year as well, is the speed at which tapping works. So tapping's been compared to lots of these gold standards now, including just things like deep breathing or muscle relaxation or cognitive behavioral therapy. And it comes up trumps, as in it is comparable, and it is often not just non-inferior, which is a stupid word.
I was going to bring that up.
My non-inferior issue, but it is superior. But I know. It's the speed at which it works. So often if CBT accomplishes an outcome in 5 sessions, EFT actually accomplishes that in 2 sessions. If it's 8 weeks, my food craving trial showed just 8 weeks of tapping for food cravings resulted in the changes a year later. And the CBT group got the changes as well, but it took them 6 months. So 6 months of tapping compared to 8 weeks. That's where I think the difference lies. So I think lots of things out there work, and I'm not one to sort of stand there and say this is the only thing people should learn. But it's kind of then about what are the constraints we have in a therapy process, and often it is how many sessions someone can access, the amount of money or rebates they can get, or how much can they afford. And maybe if that's what is driving the process, then we need to offer strategies that we absolutely know work, but work in perhaps a faster time frame. It's probably because I'm so impatient, Brad. Like that's what drew me to tapping. I'm like, man, this thing works fast. This is for me. And research shows that now too. It's like, okay. And I'm glad you mentioned it as a stress management tool or stress reduction technique, because that is what I advocate all the time, that I never say EFT or tapping is a therapy. I never say that it's a theory or a therapeutic approach. We use it in therapy sessions, but it's a stress management tool. And I think that is why that's how it explains when people go, how can it work for so many things? It's like, well, stress is in so many things. You reduce stress, you think more clearly, you have better ideas, you cope better. And I'm really glad that you highlighted that as well, because that's sort of my soapbox that I get onto as well, to sort of say, well, get rid of stress and then see what happens, and get rid of stress faster. That should be the next book, Get Rid of Stress Faster. There's no more books.
Because you have all this time to write books. So
yeah. I just wrote one with our friend Carol Look. So we haven't released that yet. That's in a week's time. She won't mind. It's all good. Yes, so there you go. Yes, I absolutely believe it works, not just because I run trials, but I have seen the research worldwide, talk to colleagues, but it's about often the speed. It takes your breath away sometimes. And I mean, you do those fantastic videos, and even someone tapping along with you gets that effect. It's kind of like, oh, wow, where did my anxiety go? Where did my anger go? Where did it go? So.
It amazes me sometimes seeing the comments, where a 5-minute video and someone says, I went from an 8 down to a 2 on something that had been really troubling them. And that's just with a simple, introductory kind of video. So when someone does even more, and the great thing is doesn't have to be an either or with these other therapies. EFT is such an amazing complementary therapy that you can be doing CBT or exposure, all these different things, and just be tapping along and just greasing the wheels, as it were.
Yeah, that's right. It's just sort of this adjunct that really does enhance what you're already doing. So anyone out there, I guess, that does their own kind of approaches, just adding it in as an extra, just to see what it's like, adding in hypnosis to CBD enhances it. It's the same thing with tapping. So encourage everybody, have a read and just explore, just have a look at what it can do.
Yeah. So if you've been wondering where the research is, the evidence, it's here.
Wait, let's do it at the same time. And here. There you go.
Check out the science behind tapping. And even if you're already convinced, and it's just find it interesting, because there is so much, I'm already convinced, but there's so much interesting stuff in here, the case studies, the research, and how the research has been set up, and the just the scope of what it's beneficial for, which can give you an idea then of other things they can be used for. So on behalf of the tapping world, and on behalf of the world in general, thank you for finding time in your busy schedule to write this book.
Oh, pleasure.
And finding some time in your busy schedule, because I know you've got Mind Heart Connect coming up. Yeah. And people can check out Mind Heart Connect, and we'll have a link in there. And
we actually sold out now, Brad. So
well, never mind. Forget about Mind Heart.
It's in a week's time. It's all right. Could we let people know though that if they do, just as a thank you and as a gift for obviously investing, if they go and buy the book and, Kindle, hard copy, whatever, that we are offering 4 free gifts that they can access just to kind of complement. So if anyone wants to go to my website, put your receipt number in, just peterstapleton.com, just go to the science behind tapping, and 4 free gifts. So a couple of ebooks there, but a live demo. It's actually a real session where I'm tapping with my own daughter, and she had a piano exam coming up, and she let me video her. So you can actually, and I do tell you at the end what happened. So she went on to do the exam, and there is a postscript there of what happened to Elise in the exam and after the exam. But yeah, it's quite funny. So she let me video her. She's got a bear in the video and things. So you can have access to that. And of course, a keynote from a couple of years ago that normally isn't available free. People can have access to that as well. So absolutely make sure you get those so that they might actually help as well.
Excellent. And I'll put a link to that in the information box. So everyone just check the link down there. And also put a link to your TEDx talk. So
oh, that'd be fabulous. Yes. Yeah. Because yeah, that was such 18 minutes, like these TED Talks, 18 minutes, and you can't have any notes. It was a lot of tapping involved in that. But no, I really enjoyed that. And that was such a unique opportunity just to be able to, and what I do share in that is very much why tapping works. So not just some of the, kind of highlights of research, but 3 reasons, which do come out of the book, 3 reasons why it actually does work.
The next wave.
4th wave.
4th wave of psychological movement. Yeah. So awesome. Well, thank you again for writing the book. Thank you for all the research that you've contributed to validating this phenomenal technique. And thanks for spending time with us.
Oh, thank you, Brad. Thank you for my second invitation.
My pleasure.